I was right. Last week, when the first episode of Severance Season 2 released, I theorized that the second episode would be its sister episode in which we saw only the outies' lives instead of just the innies, and that's exactly what happened. I'm a genius. It totally wasn't telegraphed very clearly through the titles. Nobody else thought this. This is my win. Anyways, with that small victory out of the way, Severance Season 2 Episode 2, Goodbye Mrs. Selvig, released on Friday, and gave us a lot more context to the events of the first episode, as well as returning to us all of the characters that we missed in Episode 1. Well, except one. But the amount of discussion surrounding her is practically enough that it feels like she's there right alongside the rest. I have to admit, this episode to me was just a little bit worse than its predecessor, though for mostly metatextual reasons that we'll get to right after this spoiler warning. That was the spoiler warning. I'm going to talk about the show now. So, as I said, this episode does follow the structure that I had thought, which is that we entirely focus on the outside world and all of the characters that inhabit it, meaning no Lumen work at all, and none of the core four interacting with one another. And honestly, this is probably the best quality of the episode. The only reason I had some doubt about this episode being purely outies was because I wasn't sure the show was ready to show us Irving's outie, Dylan's outie, and Helena Egan, all characters which were purposefully concealed in Season 1. And Mark's outie, Devin, and Miss Cobell would not have been enough to carry an episode. But no, they went there. Here, we see brand new characters on display, which certainly gave the episode some uniqueness. The best of these was easily Helena Egan, who carries with her the same threatening aura as Natalie, the PR rep, just being so eerily calm and agreeable. However, she's much more complex behind the scenes, as we can see that she's either beginning to pity or obsess over her innie, Helly, in this very close and personal scene in which she replays Helly and Mark's kiss repeatedly, studying it while in some form of distress. Britt Lower has the challenge on her hands of now playing two characters who quite literally hate each other, and she's handling it about as well as one could. She already proved herself with Season 1, but it's clear that the writers are taking it up a notch, yet this does not diminish her skills at all. It really just gives her more time to shine. The others, Dylan and Irving, are a bit less developed though. I enjoy seeing the two of them on screen, and Dylan's story is used to show how Severance is viewed by the public, a plot point from Season 1 that is truly intriguing. Honestly, I just wish we saw more of these two that implies how they are different from their innies. Mark and Helly's personalities inside and outside Lumen both differ heavily, so it would make sense if the others were different as well. While we can see that Dylan is certainly more down-to-earth than his innie, there's not much development there. Hopefully we can see more of these two outies throughout the season. What this episode mostly focuses on plot-wise is telling us the behind-the-scenes of Lumen Industries, where we get a little bit more of an explanation on what Project Cold Harbor, which involves Miss Casey, aka Mark's wife Gemma, truly is. Still, we don't really get told much of anything about what the project is doing, but the heads of Lumen are absolutely hyper-focused on getting this project done, essentially willing to give the outies and innies anything so that they will continue their work. At first, they just try to bring Mark back and separate him from the others, but when it becomes clear that he will not work if he is without his friends, they convince Dylan and Irving's outies to come back to work, as well as sending Helena in as well. I do want to quickly address a fan theory surrounding Helena, which is that Helly has actually been Helena from the very beginning of the season. While I do actually kind of love this idea and think it would be a very creative way to spy on the main group, the episode implies otherwise, and it seems a bit too women in refrigerators for a show that is this smart with its writing. Not saying that's out of the picture, though. So the Lumen Industries are able to get the outies and the innies back on board. It seems that they completely fabricated the idea of severance reform from Episode 1, because, in fact, there was no public outcry in reaction to Helly's speech. Helena Egan basically made a YouTube apology video in which she lies that she was simply drunk, and this controls the situation, which is honestly believable. With how strong Lumen is, it would actually be kind of shocking if they couldn't control such a small outburst. Also, and this is a bit weird, but it seems to be the case, I believe that Mr. Milchick also lied to the indies about the amount of time that they had been gone. He says in the first episode that they had been gone 5 months, and yet this episode, which covers the time between the Season 1 finale and the end of Hello, Miss Cobell, appears to be about, only a week. Milchick seemingly wants the group to think that they've taken lots of time to reconsider the environment and such, but this is a very brave lie, And overall, the leaps that Lumen is taking, while smart, are also very brave. Their desperation is on display, since while they seem so calm and collected, they are making sacrifices that they don't want to in order to get Project Cold Harbor finished, which implies that it might be even bigger than the whole growing people theory that I posed before. Still, I would guess that Cold Harbor is going to, in some way, give Kier dominance over the rest of the world, which would really heighten the stakes. Whatever it is, the cryptic nature of this episode is truly fascinating, and the writers are smart enough to even show us the meetings between the higher-ups at the company while still keeping us in the dark about their intentions. It's good stuff. When it comes to Outie Mark's storyline, we definitely get a good amount of setup. Mark is the only person who returns to work immediately, which is likely to not arouse suspicion, given that he is the only one to know that his innie took over, aside from Helena Egan, of course. However, more majorly, innie Mark's outburst at the end of Season 1 comes back into play, as Mark, Devin, and Rickon wonder whether Mark was referring to the latter, to his baby, or his thought-deceased wife when he said, "she's alive." This subplot shows off a lot of Mark's attachment to blissful ignorance, something which both he and his innie possess. Devin actually ends up being the one leaning towards the side of Gemma, while Mark heavily leans the other way, though based on emotion instead of evidence. While he did identify his wife's body, Mark's angriness at Devin appears to be more out of her dragging up traumatic past events that he doesn't want to think about, rather than, actual cold hard facts. And worst of all, this is then used to control him. The two's conversation is overheard, and later, when Milchick goes to meet with Mark to convince him to come back to work, he triggers his depression that caused him to sever himself in the first place on purpose. These two scenes are acted flawlessly by Adam Scott in a very somber and hostile way, and offer a lot to the characterization of Mark, as he soon does agree to come back to Lumen despite his innie's warnings. Unfortunately, this is where we reach my biggest criticism of this episode, which is its meandering tendencies. With the first episode, I discussed how it felt as if it was one that only laid down pieces, but I wasn't critical of it for that, since it was just episode 1. But with this being its sister episode that is composed of almost entirely different characters, it ends up being very similar, only setting up different stories in a similarly slow-paced way. And when we're on to the second week of Severance, waiting starts to feel more torturous. Admittedly, this does make a lot of sense for the writing of the series, but getting another episode that is excruciatingly slow is difficult. We're on episode 2, but it feels like episode 0, which makes the fact that only 8 episodes remain a little worrying. I hope this sluggish beginning does not lead to issues with the pacing by the middle portion of the season as well, where they would have to speed it up, but I trust that this is all part of the plan, even if it makes this episode a little harder to get through. And generally, those are my thoughts on Goodbye Mrs. Selvig, a title which likely refers to the fact that we will never see that alter ego neighbor character ever again. I never really got a chance to address Patricia Arquette's performance throughout this episode, so I'll just toss it on here. She's incredible. The woman is a raving monster that is so clearly teetering on the edge of insanity, and watching her attempt to play Lumen's games while they clearly only offer her a helping hand so they can manipulate her is thrilling. Miss Cobell is a puzzle piece that just doesn't fit, and yet the writers managed to make that a positive instead of her feeling awkward. And that final screech as she begins to understand that Outie Mark may know of his wife's survival is horrifying. Cobell is one of the most devoted to the cultish vibe of Kier, so even if she is stabbed repeatedly in the back, she just can't let their plans go to waste. I have to give this episode an 8 out of 10, though it notably slots in below the first episode, which got the same rating. Really, though I am beginning to get impatient, I am still ultimately on the edge of my seat for the next episode, which should return us back to our usual scheduled programming. Oh, and we have the intro back. That was pretty sick. Bye now.